Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Tuesday, December 2nd, because Alek Manoah is a Los Angeles Angel. Just kidding, of course. We're here tonight because the Toronto Blue Jays have made another addition to the rotation. It is Cody Ponce, the reigning KBO MVP, the reigning KBO Cy Young Award winner, their version of it over in Korea. And interesting news for Toronto as they go out and make another free agent splash. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jory, we are back to discuss another starter, much different than the Dylan Cease signing, but still, I think, exciting nonetheless for this Toronto team.
Super interesting, super exciting. Definitely could mean some things. And I think we'll get into that over the course of the
Yeah.
next 20, 30 minutes, however long we ultimately go here. But as an upside play, everybody on Twitter that I know that is smart or knows ball,
Smart.
there's a lot of love for this move. I'm not going to pretend that I am the number one Cody Ponce guy. I know as much as probably a lot of our listeners do, but what I do know and what I have gathered, this is a guy that has some velo, that can start, which is interesting, as I said, that has a nasty new pitch and a kick change that comparable to some of the other splitters that the Blue Jays seem to target, noticing a pattern there. And then finally, he just shoved, and I think I'll read out the numbers here just to illustrate how good he was in the KBO. 17-1, not a pitcher wins guy, but even I gotta respect that. A buck 89 ERA and 12.6 Ks per nine to just 2 walks per nine. I believe it was first of all, the best ERA in KBO, but I think also the highest K minus walk ratio in KBO as well. So this is a guy that very clearly changed something this past summer and is going to come back a completely different pitcher than the guy that was here in 2021 with a 7.04 ERA for the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Yeah, I think, looking at what somebody did in 2021 probably isn't going to be too demonstrative of what he's going to be in 2026 at this point for the Blue Jays. So, really intriguing, kind of peripherals around the changes that he's made in his profile. And you mentioned the kick change there. Obviously the fastball, it seemed to tick up here over the past couple of years to 95, 96. And then, he's kind of got, a whole bunch of other weapons. It's a cutter, it's a curveball, it's a sinker. Lance Brosdowski does great work on Twitter, does great work in Chicago with the Cubs and kind of, across baseball. And he had some really good insights on Ponce's arsenal and what that may look like. He pointed out the cutter as something that will be thrown more by Ponce in MLB. And, I think you kind of look at, Ponce is a guy who has never really walked that many hitters, right? And if you're looking at a number four, number five starter, I mean, it's a good place to start with a guy who doesn't walk people, right? Because you're going to be able to be efficient and throw some innings. And I think, with the Dylan Cease signing, we were kind of talking about bringing in a guy who has kind of that baseline of innings, and Ponce is right there. Like he threw 180 innings last year, and I think it's going to be kind of interesting to see how things go, how they use him. I kind of want to spend some more time on him, the pitcher, before we get into what it means for the Bowden Francises of the world, the Ricky Tiedemans, the Eric Lauers. But I think the signing overall, obviously the Blue Jays, Ross Atkins had kind of talked earlier this offseason about the intriguing group of pitchers that were coming over coming over the Pacific, and everybody kind of thought he was talking about Tatsuya Mai, but of course we end up here with Cody Ponce. And one thing that I mentioned to you before we hit record was kind of looking at Eric Fetty's number, because Eric Fetty had done similar things in Korea, right? He came over after being the league MVP. He was 20-6. He had the 2 ERA, the really great walk, really great strikeout numbers. But I do want to, point out that Ponce, like he set the league strikeout numbers in totality, right? Like he struck out, I believe it was 225 hitters in total, or 252, excuse me. So a huge number there. And if you're comparing like his strikeout numbers to those of Fetty, It was like about 7% higher, and the walk rate was like a little bit higher, but I think that kind of shows that there is maybe a little bit more upside with Ponce than there was with somebody like Fetty, who came over and was really effective right away, but it's kind of fallen off since signing that deal.
Yeah, I think stuffed up to the gills is probably a good way to put it. And in comparison to Fetty, also worth noting that Fetty bounced for like a year and then came back,
Yeah.
as opposed to Ponce, who obviously has really kind of taken some time to sort of hone his craft. Something I think also worth acknowledging kind of relates to, where he fits, but even beyond that, kind of is in the discussion of just Ponce's role in general. We had heard a couple times from Blue Jays insiders, namely that, the likes of Shai Davidi, that the Jays were looking for something of a swingman, someone that could pitch in the rotation, but could also pitch in the bullpen. And those guys don't really exist exactly in spades. Obviously, Eric Lauer is one example of that, but not every team has more than a guy. Some teams don't even have a guy that can really kind of swing back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen. With Ponce, I recognize there's length, I recognize he's a starter, but the velo he's basically shown you as a starter and the stuff that he's presented as well, it's good enough that it should and could play up in a bullpen if need be. Now, is he gonna probably start the year for the Jays in the rotation? Hard to say. I mean, the picture is murky right now, but there's enough versatility, enough utility with a guy like Ponce that the fit there, it seems a lot cleaner than even a guy like a Tatsuyamai or even a Michael King,
Yeah.
where they're in the rotation and getting paid like a rotation piece. At 3 years, 30 million for 10 million a year, he's basically the 2025-26 version of Yariel Rodriguez, excuse me, from a couple years back.
Yeah, it really makes things interesting with this entire pitching staff, right? Because even, if you were to start, if opening day had come this morning before the Blue Jays had made this signing, you could have like a pretty solid 13-man pitching staff with what the Blue Jays already had, assuming everybody's healthy and everybody's back and everything like that. But now, adding this extra guy who you're paying $10 million a year, so he's going to be on the roster somewhere, right? And who knows what this does mean for Jose Barrios. Before we really kind of dive in on that side, though, I did kind of want to mention the Hyunjin Ryu stuff because I think that's pretty cool. Where Ponce was teammates with Ryu this past season. He wore Ryu's jersey as he warmed up for the All-Star game. Kind of funny that on the day that Alek Manoah lands with the Angels, that the Blue Jays get another 6'6" right-hander who is good buddies with Hyunjin Ryu.
Yes, time is a flat circle around these parts, clearly. I don't know how many other comparisons between those two there are going to be. Who knows? Maybe Alek Manoah heads off to Korea and finds himself a magical pitch in a couple years' time. But I mean, it's fun to have guys like Ryu kind of pop up in Blue Jays lore here, kind of here, there, and everywhere. I wonder how much Ryu ultimately played a role here in recruiting Ponce to end up a Blue Jay.
Yeah.
Winning certainly will have been a big draw. And, even though he's a guy coming over from a Korea, from the Pacific Rim, not really in the same vein as a guy like an Otani, like a Sasaki, where, the Dodgers are such institutions there, whereas Ponce obviously grows up in the States. I think at the end of the day, I just do think that there is something to be said about Ryu being like a global ambassador for these Blue Jays and the role that he may or may not have played. And I'm sure we'll learn about this in the weeks to come when we do ultimately get introduced to Cody Ponce. Exactly what kind of role Hyunjin Ryu ultimately played in this deal.
Yeah, so one thing I'm seeing here from Daniel Kim, who does kind of great work with Korea, is that Hyunjin Ryu's interpreter with the Blue Jays is a international scout for Toronto now. So you have to imagine, there's probably just like 1,000 connections, right, between these guys, and just really cool. But we can kind of dive more into the rotation stuff because I think that's like super interesting about what this does and what this means, and obviously after the Dylan Cease signing, you're looking at the five guys that the Blue Jays have lined up, right? Like it's Cease, Gosman, Yasavage, Bieber, and Barrios, and you're like, well, you feel good about Cease, what he's going to give you coming in. You feel good about Kevin Gosman. You feel like the floor is really high there. Trey Yasavage, he's probably not going to be striking out twelve guys every game and no hitting teams through five and a
Not
third.
yet,
There's
at least not
not
yet.
yet, but there's a certain level of talent there that gives you confident that he's going to give you a high level every time he takes one out. And Bieber, obviously, same thing coming off Tommy John. I think he kind of showed you his floor last year with kind of what to expect for him. Maybe a little bit of inconsistencies, and then Jose Barrios, obviously, kind of the wild card, I suppose, at the back end. And then, of course, beyond them, you have Eric Lauer, who was nails for the Blue Jays in 2025 and certainly deserves a shot at a spot on the roster, whether that's, as kind of a fill-in rotation guy, if they need to save you Savage some innings, if Bieber kind of needs a breather, if the load from last year catches up to Gosman, having Lauer in that spot is so valuable to this team. And he's kind of like the swing guy that, was that you were talking about earlier that they were looking at adding. And then, of course, you have Bowden Francis in the picture. And to me, this move maybe signals that they don't have the most confidence in Bowden Francis being able to bounce back in 2026. Even though he was healthy and he was pitching again at the end of the year. He pitched in those inter squad games that they had, and obviously wasn't able to make it back for the postseason, but it seems like the writing might be a little bit on the wall with the signing for him. And then beyond that, of course, Ricky Tiedemann, Adam Macko, Gage Stanford, guys like that are impacted by this as well. And, the level that it's going to take for them to crack the big league roster at all in 2026 just went up.
Do you think that Ponce is a guarantee to be part of the Blue Jays rotation? And where does he slot into the Blue Jays rotation next year if that is the case?
Yeah, I don't think you can call like I guess it is a guarantee because they gave him this contract, which I mean it's essentially the Jeff Hoffman contract, right? So if he ends up being a reliever, that's totally fine. I think that he's a lock to be on the 26-man opening day roster given health. But I won't go as far to call him a lock in the rotation because again, we haven't heard what the intention is there. But I mean, for you, I mean, who is this more indicative of what could be coming over the next few months? Is it Jose Barrios? Is it Bowden Francis? Is it Eric Lauer? Is it Savage? Is it Bieber? Is it like who is kind of the guy that you thought of immediately once this signing came down?
I mean, the easy one is Barrios just because they're kind of squeezing them out of the picture here. But there's so much term and so much money left on that deal, assuming he opts in, that there's a lot to me in the way of questions for what this means more broadly. Now, I mean, I don't want to steal it from you because you were the one that brought this up before we hit the record button about Bieber and what this could mean about him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think if you're a Blue Jays fan, it doesn't like make you sleep any easier at night thinking Bieber opted into a contract basically giving up 70 million, something around there, right? To kind of prove and seemingly it seemed like he enjoyed the culture and wanted a year to prove and increase his earnings, but at the same time, he's cutting into that Tommy John honeymoon. He's taking such a significant discount. I think it's fair to kind of wonder if there is a health issue there, kind of what what the real motivation was behind that. I would assume that he's healthy. We went back and we watched his final pitch of game 7 of the World Series where he got a ground out. Everything looked okay. Velo looked okay. So I don't think that there's any red flags coming up about his profile. I just think that the way that they went out and prioritized pitching this year And maybe it's just because they don't have the confidence in Barrios and Bowden, and there's going to be some guardrails on you, Savage, right? Like I could see them, you know, putting some kind of innings limit on him next year, similar to what we've seen in the past with like Steven Strasburg and guys like that, given just like how much um just the huge jump that he had for his innings in 2025, and how you go from pitching in high A to pitching in the World Series. Like that's not something that's easy on your body and easy on your arms. So maybe that's all it is, that they just want to really, really ensure that those guys are all kind of have their backups. But at the same time, even after the C signing, you're kind of looking at it like, well, I mean, they got Lauer, they got Mako, they got Bowden Francis, like they have, a ton of names that you feel like could kind of insulate that group. But now it's kind of like, well, you
It's a
got
little crowded. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
there's a lot of guys in that pitching room, and it's gonna be interesting to see how things play out, and I'm really excited for to kind of to hear like what their plan is for Cody Ponce when they initially speak on the deal.
Yeah, I think that we'll learn a lot pretty quickly. I mean, the discussion basically centers around, is he a starter or is he a reliever? The first question that surely is going to get asked here is going to be, is Ponce going to be part of the rotation?
Could you
And
imagine
if the
for first question the Cody Ponce press conference, and it's like, so what's your plan for Jose Barrios?
it's more or less going to be asking around that question, because it really is, is it a six-man rotation? Probably not. You just spent $210 million in Dylan Cease. Okay, if it's not a six-man rotation, then where does everybody here fit? The Dodgers obviously are the one that, or rather the example that everyone's pointing to, where it's kind of like guys break, and if they break, they just plunk someone in there, and steady as she goes. There's a bit of a difference between the Dodgers going with Tyler Glasnow and his history of injuries, and Blake Snell and his history of injuries, as opposed to the Blue Jays, who, very famously have leaned on the workhorse kind of archetype, or the workhorse kind of build, as opposed to the pure stuff guys. Now, obviously, Dylan Cease is kind of a bit of both, but another guy that makes a lot of starts. Jose Barrios makes a lot of starts. Kevin Gausman makes a lot of starts. These are guys that don't historically tend to have a lot of problems with arm health, and, knock on wood, knock on every other surface you can think of. But it just feels very crowded, as opposed to the situation with the Dodgers, where, Ohtani was coming back from Tommy John, and Clayton Kershaw himself was, kind of maybe part of the rotation, but probably not part of the rotation, but was also recovering from injury. Like for them, on any given day, someone new was getting put on the injured list. The Jays dealt with pitching injuries. Nobody, pretty much in the history of baseball, arguably, uh, dealt with as much churn as a team like the Dodgers over the past couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be like just the fit is so interesting to see. And I think the Dodgers actually is a pretty good team to bring up by you, because you look at the Dodgers of 2024 that win the World Series, right? And their rotation in the World Series it was like Yamamoto, but he was coming back from injury and wasn't really all that healthy. It was like Walker Buehler was making starts, like they were going bullpen day. There's somebody else I'm not thinking of that was kind of making consistent starts for them. Oh, Jack Flaherty is who I was thinking of, right? And so like that's and they like were having starting pitching issues up and down, despite the number of like talented starters that they had, because Ohtani wasn't pitching, Snell wasn't there, Kershaw was hurt. Glasnow was hurt. And then you look at the Dodgers in 2025, and they're rolling out, Glasnow, Snell, Ohtani, and Yamamoto, and like all kind of peak of powers, right? So I think it just kind of shows you that there is value in having a number of viable starting options. And it's funny because even the Blue Jays in 2025, like if they had, say whatever, if things had turned out differently, and they could have had Eric Lauer and Chris Bassett starting in the World Series, right? But they were able to kind of get to a point where it was Gosman, Bieber, Savage, and Scherzer. So this year you're probably looking at it as like Cease, Gosman, Bieber, Savage. In an ideal world, one of those guys is out. Whatever happens with Barrios, and then you've got like a totally different number of options if you need in October. So, yeah, you can never have too much pitching, and I guess that's really going to be proven true by this deal. But going to be super interesting to see what they feel like is the route for them to make room for him.
Yeah, just supremely fascinating, I think is the word that I'm going to use there. Just because it introduces a lot of uncertainty to a group that, all things considered, it seemed like for opening day, your five-man rotation seemed pretty much set. I mean, there wasn't really much in the way of competition to be expected going into the spring and even into kind of the first month or so of the season. And now all of a sudden, is this the end of Jose Barrios? Is this, you know, is Shane Bieber battling injury? Is Cody Ponce going to emerge here as like a number four, number three? Is this a completely different guy? Where does he slot in? Maybe, they talk about a new guy closing games. Is Cody Ponce the closer?
Could you imagine that would be?
Like that would be unfathomable almost.
So I do. So I want to talk about the bullpen situation a little bit as well here because, right now on Fangraphs, obviously, we do love looking at the roster resource and the eight-man bullpen that they have laid out for the Blue Jays right now. They put Ponce into the rotation. So the eight guys that they have listed right now that are set to be relievers: Jose Barrios, Eric Lauer, Yario Rodriguez, Brendan Little, Tommy Nance, Louis Varland, Jimmy Garcia, Jeff Hoffman. So, if you watch the Blue Jays in 2025, you'll notice that there are a couple of names that you're probably familiar with that I didn't mention there, who they have listed as starting the year in AAA, and that is Braden Fisher, Mason Fluharty, Paxton Schultz is there, Justin Brule is there, Bowden Francis is in AAA. Um, what do you think of that eight, and how do you think that this kind of impacts this?
Uh,
But before you go, I also think that this may be Angel Bastardo. I think going to be tough to find a spot for him.
yeah, you think that clock might be ticking too.
Yeah, he might be
Goodness.
heading back to the Red Sox.
I don't know, man. It's just so fascinating the way that this signing just completely shatters any expectations.
Yeah.
I think a lot of those names as well. I think it's just going to be a bit of a juggling game. I wouldn't be surprised if you think of last year and Richard Lovely was on the opening day roster.
Yeah.
Jacob Barnes on the opening day roster. The life of a reliever is fickle. It's very famously very fickle. And, there's the talk that they're going to go out and add a big name bullpen arm as it is. You think about Robert Suarez as a guy that, I wonder if they're still in the mix for him. And you wonder if Edwin Diaz is a guy that they could be chasing after as well. There's a lot in the way of questions left to be answered on the pitching side when it kind of seems like things had like already been answered almost. And now all of a sudden, I mean, this Ponce move just creates all kinds of different machinations that could and might happen.
So this is probably it for Chris Bassett and Max Scherzer, I would imagine.
Well, for sure, I would say for Scherzer, I would definitely say it's hard to imagine him making his way back at this point. With Bassett, probably hard again to see exactly where he fits exactly into this picture. But, it's going to be really interesting to see exactly what they choose to do if they do make the call to go out and try to bring either of these guys back. But it's right now, it's a bit of a crowded pitching staff to say the least.
I think that's the theme of the signing is the pitching room, the bullpen a little crowded now. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, like I think you actually like when you mentioned the Dodgers and bring up their situation, I think that's kind of exactly the type of group that the Blue Jays are trying to build, like one that is going to be able to survive injury, to survive underperformance, to survive unexpected things happening, right? Like I bet you, they look at their 2025 season and once they kind of started to turn the corner, I think I wish I could remember the stat exactly, but there was a point where it was like they would win like th three or four, and then they would lose the Bowden Francis start every time. And then Bowden Francis goes on the IL, and then that turns into Jose Urena, Spencer Turnbull, right? So I think that from that experience, they're probably thinking, well, we didn't have enough depth. So they're going to overcorrect to that this year, right? And so now that is, whatever, whoever you kind of want to put in there is that fifth man spot. Maybe it's Barrios, maybe it's Ponce, maybe it's whoever. Maybe Trey Savage gets this isn't going to happen. He's not going to get. I was going to say maybe he gets a month off to start the year. Not going to happen. But maybe they are okay with Savage kind of working on like a 6-day rotation schedule, and they kind of figure that out, and Ponce helps you kind of paper that over, and somebody gets hurt, then you immediately have your five. Somebody else gets hurt, somebody else has underperformance. Eric Lauer's right there to step up, and then of course beyond that you'll have Jake Bloss coming back, Ricky Tiedemann, Adam Macko, um, a number of guys that will kind of fit into that conversation. So it's I think initially you're kind of trying to wrap your head around where it fits, but I think at the end of the day, it's just a move to give them kind of that safety valve and that protection of no matter what happens, they're going to have quality options and quality strikeout stuff to fill in their rotation.
I mean, at the end of the day, you want to grade this deal, it's a good deal. The upside here, it's a huge
Yeah.
upside play, and you love the deal. Um, I think the thing that you don't love, which nobody loves, is the uncertainty that it kind of implies for
I
the
mean,
rest of this
like
Blue
if
Jays.
you're Jose Barrios, like obviously there's been some reporting that the relationship with the front office isn't in a great spot right now. And if you're Jose Barrios and you see this deal happen, certainly would imagine your head goes,
Displeased.
yeah, you're confused. You probably I wonder did they make a call to Jose Barrios and be like, hey, this is what we're doing, or maybe it is a precursor to Jose Barrios trade. Like we really can't say. And I we'll talk. We'll release this episode having talked all about like, oh, what are they gonna do with all of these pitchers, and then they'll make one move, and you'll be like, oh, that makes
There's
sense.
your answer.
Yeah. But no, fun one. I think these Korea signings and these Japan signings are always exciting to kind of see what these guys are going to do. I think there is a pretty good baseline with Ponce's stuff for a high level of success, and what he's going to do. He seems like a really cool dude, and maybe a little bit of a different cat. So that'll be cool to throw into the mix in Toronto. And I think we'll certainly kind of see the picture come into a little bit better focus as the offseason continues. And with the winter meetings, I guess they're about 5 or 6 days away here. We're gonna really really start to get into it here soon.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot on movement on the pitching side, some big holes to fill on the hitting side, and could get some answers
Jory wants
very
that
soon.
so bad.
Just saying, Kyle Tucker still sitting there. The Yankees have been like, I don't know if we can spend the money, and the Mets have been like, I don't know if we can spend the money. Who is spending money right now?
Were you disappointed by the Devin Williams Met signing?
It's okay. Cody Ponce really eases the pain.
Yeah, I mean it'll be fun. I think next steps you don't need to another you don't need to add another starter now. You got the rotation settled. I think the back end of the bullpen and the hitter are very easy things to point to as the next
Yes,
steps. You
yes,
got
that's
any
that's where it's gonna be for sure. I mean, it's very clear. It's the pitching. I think by and large has been addressed. A couple of big names that you're hearing a little bit about the Jays kind of swirling and stuff. Would like to see some movement on that front, but we'll see.
Cody Ponce was a guy that the Jays had been frequently connected to all offseason. So we'll see. We'll see. It's that time of the year. The hot stove is picking up, it's heating up. The Jeff Passan and Kylie McDaniel are releasing trade candidate articles and not connecting to the Jays to any of them, which was kind of funny. But no, good time of year, exciting. Cody Pons will be a fun guy to watch, and it's kind of funny. He looks like a combination of Dylan Cease and Alek Manoah with
I
the
also
beard.
saw that.
Yeah, it's It's kind of cool. But before
Uh,
we run, you got any last Cody Ponce thoughts? You got any last predictions about who's going to be the five in the rotation in March?
I am so underqualified to tell you who that five will be, but I think we'll get some answers sooner rather than later.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for us here tonight at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening along on the audio provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jory is at J Negin-Shecter. And the pod is at BEV_pod. Thank you so much for listening.